Hi, I'm Dr. Patricia Grabarek.
And I'm Dr. Katina Sawyer. And welcome to Thriving at Work, a Worker Being podcast.
You can learn more about us on our website, workerbeing.com, on social media, and follow along with us on LinkedIn as we both post a lot of great content there. So today, we're going to be talking about meeting time and energy throughout the day. It's a fun topic. It's somewhat intuitive, so I'll be curious to see what you think. But my first question is, when you have a full day of meetings, how do you make sure that you're taking breaks?
Oh, I think we're both bad at this.
Yes.
I do not feel equipped to answer that question. I think basically what I've done is that I've become more comfortable with integrating things that I would do during a break with people that I'm meeting with. So I'll be like, if you don't mind, I'm going to eat these crackers, or let's walk around instead of sitting for our meeting. Cause I do in-person meetings pretty frequently. Do you want to just go for a walk instead of sitting in here? Or, maybe we can go pull in this other person who we, both have questions to ask, but also enjoy socializing with, and we'll spend 10 minutes kind of the beginning of the meeting just talking about fun stuff or whatever. I think I kind of build the break into the next meeting, which is not good. But I would say in terms of energy, I have learned that I can't have anything that's extremely complicated to think about if I have the meeting later in the day. So my headiest meetings I like to do in the beginning of the day. And that gives me more energy. So if I am a little bit depleted by the end of the day, I have less crunch time stuff to think about. And then also I am distracted easier later in the day in meetings, especially if emails have piled up or something. So that's another reason why I try to, I guess I more organize my meetings and then just subject people to things they probably don't want to be subjected to.
Oh boy. Well, I wouldn't say that's a great tactic.
No.
And you're right. I do think it's funny because I was wondering what you were going to say, because I was like, I don't feel like either of us are good at it.
We're not.
And
good
that's
at
the first thing out of your mouth. It's
Yeah.
we're not good at this.
No. At least we're not lying to the listeners. We're truthful about our experiences.
No. I've tried to kind of do what some people do in the office that I think is really good. I've had some people that will just ping me a few minutes before a meeting and be like, I'll be 5 minutes late. And they then go and use the bathroom or grab a drink of water or whatever. And I always have this anxiety. I hate being late. You know this about me. I really, really don't like being late. So the idea of being I'm going to be 5 minutes late to this meeting is terrible to me. So, but I've noticed I don't mind if she does that or people do that to me. It doesn't actually bother me at all. As
you
long
don't
as
think
I know
they're
the
a bad
topic.
person.
Right. And if the topic is a little bit more flexible, or if it's a one-on-one and it's not a, very specific thing that needs to get done urgently, it's not that big of a deal. And so I've actually just asked people, I was like, would you mind if I do that? And they were like, no. I was like, okay, that makes me feel less anxious about it.
Now you have permission.
I can do that. Yeah. I have permission for sure. But ultimately, what we both do, these tips of ours are not ideal.
Yeah, no, I think that's right. But I do think it's good, and definitely for certain, there are certain things where I would get really, really, really stressed about being late for a presentation or something where I'm running the meeting, or you know what I mean? Things like that. But I agree, if it's a one-on-one situation, even if if somebody's I had it happen recently where somebody was 25 minutes late for a meeting with me and was didn't really say much when they got on. And I was like, nah, I'm not about that.
Oh, no. Yeah.
But generally, if it's 5 minutes or even 10 minutes, I'm well, they probably had they're probably experiencing the same thing that we're experiencing, and they're just like actually like
Yeah.
going pee or whatever I sometimes wish I was doing. Yeah.
Yeah, that's fair. That's fair. Well, this study actually looks at meeting time and individual like task work. Um and kind of how those two things play together, which is really important and very interesting.
Yeah,
And
it is.
gives, I think, some guidance on like how you can try to design your day better.
Cool.
So
I'm excited
let
to
me give you
learn
the
that
takeaways.
because obviously I am in need, and and you can also learn from your own article because you are too.
Oh yeah. I've actually already talked to people at my company about this
Ooh.
because I was like, okay, because I was just being asked about like how I was feeling and what's going on, whatever. And I was like, you know what? Here's the thing that I'm gonna try to do. And I'm gonna, tell people so then they know what I'm trying to do. And obviously it's not gonna always work for every single day, but I think there's something to it. So
Cool.
let me give you the takeaways.
Yay.
So takeaway number 1. If you squeeze in too many meetings during the day, compared to the amount of individual work time you have, it stops you from taking micro breaks.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's obvious. We just talked about how we have a terrible time taking breaks when we have a lot of meetings.
Exhibit A and B.
Yes, exactly. But then if you don't take those micro breaks, it actually impacts how much energy you have. And what happens is if you don't have enough energy by midday, so like if your morning is just crammed with meetings and you don't have those micro breaks, your performance and your creativity suffers for the rest of the day. And then if you don't have energy midday or at the end of the day, so both time periods, you're actually leaving the day less satisfied with your job.
Interesting. Okay. And all of that actually, like, I'm curious to hear how they like came to those conclusions and all that, but all of that like passes the litmus test of like that checks out to me based on my experiences and some of what I mentioned in my example too. Like probably I'm ordering my meetings the way that I'm ordering them because by the end I am burnt out by what I'm doing. So yeah. Okay, cool. I'm excited to learn more.
Yeah, totally. And I think, I've seen people stack like, their mornings with meetings or the afternoons with meetings and like have the work time at different points. But this study, they actually broke it up. So like they asked people some questions in the beginning of their day just to kind of control for like general fatigue. Then they had them go through their first half of their day, and midday they asked them questions about how many meetings have you had? How much time have you had to do individual breaks? How much time did you spend on individual work? How much time did you spend on breaks? And then like asking them like about their their supervisors and stuff about performance and creativity, and then asking them about their job satisfaction. So they did, and then they did that again in the afternoon. So they kind of like these 2 windows of time.
Gotcha.
And the thing that was important is like really what it comes down to is this what they call relative time proportion between meetings and individual work. So it's not about having 7 meetings. Let's say if you have 7 hours of meetings, then 7 hours, that's absurd day. Okay, 2 hours of meetings and 2 hours of work time, right? Like it's not about those 2 hours of meetings necessarily. It's about how much work time then you also have. So it's like that ratio that's particularly important. And so they looked at things like just looking at pure work time and pure meeting time and seeing how that impacted these variables. And it wasn't as important as the ratio. So there's something magical about making sure you have a fairly even ratio of meetings and individual work time. So that you're not overdoing it. And you're kind of bouncing back and forth a little bit between the two types of things. They break up your day, but not just like sitting in one or the other all day long.
That's very, very fascinating. I like this a lot. This is cool. So, and it also kind of harkens to some of what I see companies doing where they have like the, like, no meeting Fridays or what, you know what I mean? Where they're like trying to create more of those ratios or balances for people, but it probably doesn't work if you like stack it all on one day. Like it probably has to be sustainable over time.
Right. Because what ends up happening is if you are in meetings all day long for 2 days. By the time you get to that Friday, like you've already
That's it.
depleted all of your energy from those 2 days, right? So you're starting off in a bad place.
Right.
And you're not necessarily, you then probably have too much high pressure work to try to catch up on. And then are you actually going to be taking those breaks? Probably
Right.
less so.
Right.
It's really about the break here. It's like giving yourself some time to take a break, and people are more likely to take those breaks during individual task time than during a meeting.
Mm-hmm.
So when you have that time to do some tasks, you're much more likely to do some like replenishing recovery activities. And the breaks they were talking about were specifically like recovery tactic breaks.
Mm-hmm.
So disconnecting or, doing some sort of mastery thing on your own, or, talking to a friend, like those kinds of things, or taking a walk, whatever. So it's very specific to like doing something that actually replenishes your energy that helps you overall.
Cool. Okay, that's awesome. I think that that's really useful because I also think that, I don't know, I wonder what you think about this. Do you think that people have, I know what I think about it, but do you think people have more or less meetings now when people are working virtually versus in person?
More.
Yeah, I do too.
Yeah, I think there's definitely more. I think there's there's a couple factors. I think one is, leaders wanting to check in on stuff and have conversations because like they can't see people working, right? So I don't even think it's intentional. I think even the best leaders do it, but there's just like wanting to check in and see how things are going. So there's that.
Yep.
I think there's, this idea that we need to make this intentional collaboration. And so then people make meetings for those purposes or brainstorming or whatever. And that is, taking up a lot of time that you maybe wouldn't have even been doing that in the work. Like if you were in the office, right? You don't necessarily do that. You spend some time working on your own.
Right. Yep.
I also think when you're in the office, people are more likely to like see, oh, that person's going to take a lunch break, and they just kind of expect that. If you don't see you doing those activities, they kind of just will schedule and not think about it. And then the final thing I was thinking that is probably contributing to this is this idea of, oh my gosh, I just lost it. I just ran out of my brain.
That's okay.
I clearly didn't take enough breaks, but
it's very okay. If it comes back to you, let me know. I was thinking
I will.
There's also some stuff that goes on in the office where, like, if you have a Zoom meeting, let's say, so this happens to me sometimes where, like, I'm working from home and let's say you have a meeting scheduled with someone and they feel like maybe the meeting's like not necessary anymore, but they don't know how you feel about it. Or sometimes there's like in person, I think, where you actually see the person and they feel more comfortable being like, look, I know we're supposed to meet later on today, but actually I could use a little extra time. Or I was thinking that maybe we could postpone till whenever. Or you see that they're really busy and running around and you're like, you know what? Our meeting can wait. Why don't we just push it off? But I feel like in virtual environments, you don't get as much feedback from people. And so you don't suggest to do things differently, or you're not going to maybe reach out to someone as easily and be like, hey, I think we should cancel our meeting today, or think about the fact even of like what meetings are on your schedule. You're kind of more just like going without thinking about like who you're going to be seeing, but then you might see them in the office if you see them. So I think there is more, also just like, I guess it's taken as a whole, it's kind of a lack of communication, right? That is not happening when you're not just in the Zoom itself, that maybe is getting some information lost that you could use for next steps.
Yeah, I think that there's something to that for sure. I mean, I'm lucky. I do have some colleagues that will ping and say, hey, I need more time today. Can I do this meeting, whatever. So I feel like I've seen a little bit of that culture where I am today, but in other organizations, I haven't always seen that. So I think you're right. I think there's a little bit there. The other thing, I remembered the other point that I had.
Yeah.
I think the other thing that's going on is this loop where leaders and managers want to be checking in on work, but they don't always have, so they have these meetings, right, to like quickly check in with you. Then because they're checking in with you, people start to feel like, okay, maybe those people need to be in these other meetings about that topic.
Yeah.
So then you start inviting more people to meetings than you
Yep.
maybe would do in person, because
Yeah.
like what would happen is, okay, well, I'm going to bring this person, that person, while in the office, I might have that meeting with one-on-one with the collaborator and then just go pop into my boss's office and say, hey, this thing happened. Right.
Yeah.
And so since there's no like that kind of casual meeting component, there's this tendency of overbooking people. And then when you bring people into meetings they don't need to be in, then their calendars get full. Then now we're going through the cycle again, right? It's like their calendar's full. So in order to get any feedback on something, we have to do a formal meeting. And then you just keep doing this cycle of adding more meetings for no reason.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I think that this is all... We're solving all of the world's meeting problems right now.
I don't know about that. But I do think that, trying to be more intentional, and it's hard to do. It's really hard to do if you're just like an individual contributor on a team, to just be like, I'm going to block these 3 hours, throughout an hour blocks throughout the day so that I have individual work time and I can take breaks and whatever. It's hard. That's so hard to do when a meeting comes from someone maybe more senior than you or anything like that, to like actually maintain that. So there needs to be, like, I guess ultimately what I'm saying is, what needs to happen is leaders need to be setting this example. They need to be respecting time blocks for work, and they need to be trying to create an environment where it's not expected for you to be in meetings back to back. I mean, people already complain about work-life balance because of that, right? It's like, well, now when do I actually do the work? It has to be after hours.
Totally.
So we need to be better about this. And I think it has to come from like managers and up, because I think it's really hard for individual contributors to really do a good job of making this space for themselves.
Yeah. And I know we've talked about this before, but there's this like suggestion that people do, which will be like, okay, end the meeting on the 45 or something like that, right? So that people, or end it. I know there's a more specific suggestion that there is some science behind where you end it on like the 47 or something, people will actually end it then. But I noticed when people started doing those interventions to end the meetings a little bit earlier so that you could have that time to like build in for the break in between. What I heard people saying just anecdotally, this is not like scientifically based, is that all that happened was like, then somebody would just book the next meeting at the 45. So like the intention was supposed to be that like you ended at the 45 and then everybody has 15 minutes until the next break or until the next meeting, and then they have that 15 minutes break. But what I was hearing from people is like eventually that sentiment wore off, and maybe that's their company culture, and it just went to them, people are booking meetings on the 45.
Wow. See, the thing I'm guilty of, and I think I've experienced the most, is when people do that, they just don't respect that time end. It's like, oh, well, we're ending at 11:50.
Yeah.
But really, we're still talking, so let's just go to 12.
Right.
And then you end up, doing a full hour-long meeting versus a 50-minute meeting, right? And I know, like, Microsoft has that, like, my company has that default, right? And most places I've worked actually had done that default of 25 minutes or 50-minute meetings. And yet 90% of the time, people never respected it.
Over.
And they would go the full half hour, the full hour. And then it's just like, well, it just looks nicer on the calendar, but it's actually not doing anything.
Right. Because it's all bleeding into that time when you were supposed to be doing things to take care of yourself. Yeah, that I think so. One of the things from that then would be that it can't just be a practice. It has to be a culture that goes along with it. Probably a shift where people buy into the idea that this is important in addition to having a practice that supports it.
Yeah, it's a great reminder. I'm glad you kind of brought that up because I'm very guilty of going over.
I do too.
Especially like if I'm in a one-on-one or something, then I kind of feel like, oh, well, we're talking about something that's important to that person, so I'm not going to cut them off. And I think for one-on-ones, like as long as that person's okay with it, maybe that's fine. But like when you're doing like a more structured meeting with a lot of people or even just a handful of people doing something with a specific agenda and purpose, I think I could do a lot better of being like, okay, we're at 25, thanks, instead of being like, oh, we're at 30,
Right.
and trying to at least model that behavior, and hopefully others will get it. But you're right, like it is a culture thing because not everybody does it. In many of the cultures I've seen that have tried to do this, they just ignore it, and then you're the weird one if you're ending the meeting at the time that it's scheduled, you know?
Yeah, and the only time that I really enforce like strict end times is if I have a meeting right then, where I'm like, I have to go. But if I don't have a meeting right then I don't think of it as an actual ending, which I think is what we're saying, right? So then I'm like, well, you know, I don't actually have something. But the idea of like, no, wanting to put that buffer time in between the next meeting is actually having something is important.
Exactly. I think that's the thing is like we need to start to see it as an actual end time and behave that way. And I mean, really, that's kind of in some ways it's what this study is talking about, right? It's like making sure we have those breaks. And with meetings, we don't tend to take those breaks. So there's kind of two ways you can go about fixing the problem. There could be building in breaks between meetings, so that's reasonable. Or the way that they've kind of framed all of this and what they've found is having more individual work time sprinkled in when you have a chunk of meetings. So like making sure you have a balance of your time. Yeah. So I think either way, you can really address the same problem.
I also think there's something about individual work time that's probably relaxing in and of itself, that you don't have to be like on and presenting. And like, I feel like you just have, like you're saying, more autonomy over what you're doing during that time. So if I want to eat my snack while I'm working individually, I'm not thinking about that. I'm like, oh, is it okay for me to do this? Or who can I do this in front? I can just do whatever. Or, okay, I'm really, really hungry, but I'll wait the 30 minutes until this meeting's over so I can eat something. You just have more ability to call the shots and be more relaxed about what you're doing as opposed to feeling like you're just on all the time.
Exactly. And it made me think about like when you're working remotely and there's like the integrators and the segmenters. And I know we've talked about that before, but the people that like to integrate their work in their life, when you have more of this downtime, well, not, you know, this individual work time, then you can actually integrate more effectively, right? Versus if you have meetings all day long, then how are you actually able to integrate? You can't. Right. And then what you end up doing is your work just bleeds into the evening versus integrating, and then your work happening in the evening because you've made lunch in the middle of the day and spent an hour with your walking your dog or whatever. Like those types of things aren't happening, so then you're ultimately not even being able to integrate, which might be your preference of the way to work, and that can create a lot of other challenges in terms of how you feel about your work-life balance, well-being, blah blah blah. So, you know, just thinking about how you're structuring your day can have impacts on like so many things beyond just, you know, energy in the middle of the day, like the study found, or obviously that talks about performance, creativity, all those things. Like there's so many things that are impacted if we could just structure our days a little bit better and give ourselves those breaks, because we know those breaks are so important.
Yep. Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a really, really, really good call out. And I also think that, you know, people need to be more cognizant of the idea that if they're distracted, like I was thinking about the example that I used to of like one of the reasons probably why if I have meetings that have stacked up and I haven't been able to get to personal emails or things like that, I feel distracted is because I haven't had that personal time to deal with those things that feel urgent. They're like weighing in my mind. I'm kind of distracted anyway. So if you feel that way in a meeting, then you know other people feel that way in a meeting. And if you're going to have a meeting where everybody's so burnt out because they've had a million other meetings that day with no breaks in between, no time to, you know, themselves, then you're probably holding a meeting where like less than half the people are actually listening. And then like there's no point.
Right. And like the performance, the creativity of that meeting drops, the impact of it and how it's going to impact work. Like all of that is hurt by this. And so what is the point? If you're doing this meeting and you're not even getting like the brainstorming the ideas that you need, why would you have the meeting? Right. You're not able to do the things you need to do. Why are you doing it? That just seems so silly.
Totally.
But we never take a moment to think about it and pause and do that, you know?
Yeah. So I guess if we had like some key takeaways just to recap, that leaders really need to role model this, but also take it seriously. So And there could be policies that you put in place that, there's only a certain number of hours of meetings allowed per day, or there are core meeting hours and people have to have a certain amount of free time, or respecting people's free time that they block out on the calendar, whatever those policies are. But it also has to go along with a culture where people buy that this is important. And maybe some of this data could help in convincing people that that's the case.
Yes, totally aligned. I think that's a really great takeaway, is thinking about how to make it a policy, role model it effectively, start to build it into the culture in order to improve everyone's energy levels and thus performance, creativity, and satisfaction with their jobs at the end of the day. So I think it's super important. It's a good reminder. I think it's something that we all kind of know already. So why don't we take a moment and actually make a change versus just knowing meetings all day long suck and doing nothing about it.
Yes, true. Yeah, I think that's a great set of takeaways and something we can all resonate with. So why not try to change it, not just for other people, but also for yourself?
Exactly. Totally agree. Love to hear from all of you listeners. If you have any questions, thoughts about this article or anything else, you can always email us at contact@workerbeing.com. If you want to find us on social, where we share tips and articles and things all the time, you can go to LinkedIn and find both of us. We're also on Facebook and Instagram. And then finally, if you want us to come and share some of this knowledge and research with your teams, send us a note, contact@workerbeing.com. Thanks for listening. The Worker Being podcast is hosted by us, Patricia Grabara
and Katina Sawyer, and produced by Allie Johnson.